I think we're live. Good afternoon, LEC community. My name is Edgar Palacios. I am the founder of the Latinx Education Collaborative, and our mission is to increase the representation of Latinx education professionals in K-12. Welcome to another edition of LEC Live on this, is it Tuesday? I think
Wednesday.
It's Tuesday. Wow. So on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon, I'm excited to have one of the great folks in our community here with us today, Angela Maldonado. Angela, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm cold, but we were just talking. The days are getting longer, so that's good.
For people who don't know you, or tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us where we're talking to you from.
Yeah, so I'm actually based in Philadelphia. I'm actually out of Kansas City, but the center of all the work that I do at TNTP is based out of Kansas City, so that's my connection. And I will say, don't send this to any of my friends in Philly. I do like to tell people that I do think Kansas City has Philly beat on the food front, and I don't just mean
wow.
I mean like legitimately good food, easy to access in terms of cost, getting reservations. That used to be what I told all my friends who lived in New York or DC why they needed to live in Philly, and I think Kansas City might actually be taking that championship title. But I'm actually based in Philadelphia.
Those are some strong words that you just shared with us, because I feel like Philly would probably disagree. I don't know.
They might, but they also may not have had Kansas City food. I've been to some really good places there. The best fried chicken I've ever had was in.
Okay, so where'd you go for fried chicken in Kansas City?
It was Brookside Poultry.
Brookside Poultry.
Yeah.
Never heard of it. I'm gonna go, or at least I'm gonna order it in, because I don't know if we can go anywhere anyways these days. Tell us. So I appreciate you again joining us today and talking to us about your work. So you are with TNTP. Tell us about your role and what you do for the organization.
Sure. So at TNTP, I serve as a partner and I oversee our work in a few states, including Missouri, which is where we run a couple different programs in Kansas City. And I've been leading that work for the past 3 years now. But I've been at TNTP now for 8 years. And partner is really just like a fancy title for the core of my job is to help state system leaders, school leaders, teachers solve problems, whatever the problem is that they are specifically facing. And the challenges that many of them face are the same, but their context is all so different that the solutions never look the same. And so my job is to help them figure out what is the best fit solution for them based on their community, their student demographics, their teacher demographics, teacher population, their teaching and learning model, all of those things that into the K through 12 educational experience for kids.
Walk me back a little bit. So how did you get into education to begin with?
Yeah, so I didn't have the most linear path to education in terms of I didn't set out to become an educator. I didn't go into college knowing I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be a teacher when I was young, but my parents said, you have to make a lot of money and teachers don't make money. So I went to college to be a corporate lawyer. I majored in finance, minored in business law, and was all set to go to law school. And, I did an alternative certification route program, Teach for America, and that's what got me into teaching. But the reason I went into teaching, which even at the time I was like, this will be my 2-year commitment. I'm going to do something to that I've always wanted to do. And then I'm still going to go back to the plan, which is to make a lot of money. And, what took me to TFA or put me on that path was when they did their recruitment session in one of my university classes. It triggered for me a reminder of an experience I had as a student in high school, where my guidance counselor at the time, every junior and senior in my high school had to have a guidance counselor meeting to talk about what colleges are you applying to? What are your plans post high school? And I was in the AP classes, and it was a tracked school, very similar to how schools still look now. And so was in all those special tracked classes, which were very different than the classes my friends were in, my friends from where I actually lived. And my guidance counselor didn't know me as a student, but he knew me, I think, like from the social circles, observations of who my friends were in all the social settings in a high school, you know, lunchroom, hallways, all that. And so when I had my meeting with my guidance counselor, I told him all the schools I was applying to, and he told me that all of the universities I was applying to were all stretch universities and colleges, and that my best path and choice would be I needed to make sure I applied to the local community college. And that, like, I needed to make sure I got him that application, not the application for all my other universities. And, you know, it bothered me as a high school teenager. It like made me mad, where I was like, who are you to tell me what I can and cannot do? My mom said I could go to these schools. And, you know, it didn't detract from me. Like, I ultimately ended up going to one of the schools that I applied to. I applied to NYU, and he told me that was the biggest reach school, and I got in and I went. But when, you know, I heard this presentation about TFA, this moment was triggered, this experience was triggered from the perspective of, that was just one adult one time who had, you know, almost could have derailed my educational path. And a lot of kids have that experience every day. In a K through 12 setting, starting in kindergarten. And they don't then always end up on the path that might actually be the best fit path for them. And I just think adults have such a huge responsibility to kids when you work in education, and especially when you are directly working with kids, whether that's as a teacher, guidance counselor, social worker. So that is what took me to education. And then, of course, the reason I have stayed since is, you know, the kids that I ended up actually working with and teaching, and seeing like, this is a lot more fulfilling than anything I could do on the corporate law side. So I did not go to law school or finish. They say the rest is history. I stayed in education after that.
You can always go back to law school and finish, by the way, always an option. Before I go to my next question here, I want to just acknowledge Rico Francis, a fellow TNT peer.
Yes,
Angela. Did you see Rico?
I did see
Rico. Actually, so I am curious, though, because I think that experience is a common experience, the one you face with your counselor. And often, like, the limits are placed upon us in these conversations, or as we're you know, as we're students, right? Like, maybe the intent was to just level set expectations, or you know, whatever that was. There was based on some assumptions there. I'm curious as to why those statements didn't detract you. Like, why do you think that you persevered and pushed instead of letting you, like, you know, get down on it or give up?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think I think all of us really, as like Latinx people, like, just the power of our community behind us is no joke. And it's like not anything to be messed with. And while I am first generation college, my parents were always very clear of like, we do what we do so that you can go to college. And it just was never, ever a question in my head that I would go to college. It just felt like that's the logical next step after you graduate high school is you go to college. And I think not just my parents, though, right? Like, so they were they planted that seed, but I did have teachers who nurtured that seed and grew it over time, who did the opposite of what my guidance counselor did, which is like they continued to build me up. Whether it was, you know, encouraging me just around a paper I was writing, or making it a point to kind of, you know, like, under their wings. That having that community behind me has always been, I think, what has kept me going. And even in my professional career now, I think it is what actually has gotten me to my partner role at TNTP. In every single one of my jobs, from teacher all the way through to now, I've always had mentors, and I've had explicitly women of color as my mentors. Some of them have been Latina, some of them have just been women of color, but it has been having those people now post high school, post college, who have not just cultivated me in the role that I'm in, but they've cultivated me for the next role that I can get to. And they have cultivated me explicitly around the development of my racial identity as a leader. So like, what does it actually mean to lead as a Puerto Rican woman? And that is something now that I carry with me a lot in how I manage my teams, how I show up, why I do the certain work that I do. I think that has gotten me to where I'm at, and why that, one experience was just one experience and it wasn't part of a broader narrative.
No, I sincerely appreciate that context. And I think something that I'm hearing is something that we always talk about, right? It's so simple. The concept around representation matters. And it's also about that narrative, right? It's like, what conversations are we having with our own children around what they can and cannot do? How are we modeling those ways? And, I'm interested in like your journey. I'm going to ask you about your first day in a classroom at TFA and what that was like. But before I do that, I'm just going to quickly say hello to India Wells-Carter.
Yeah.
You're one of our faves too.
Yeah.
There's no way that you're not. And then Martin Clark. Hey, Martin, what's up? Good to see you. Good to see you in the space again. So yeah, like take me through. So you go to TFA. It's an exciting opportunity. It's a 2-year commitment. Walk me through your first day as a teacher. What does that feel like?
I don't remember everything, but I remember very clearly. I've always been the kind of like fake it till you make it. You can put me in almost any situation and I will like generally figure it out. Even if maybe I don't do it well all the time, but I will figure something out. And I remember on the first day, the distinct like thought of, I did not know this is what teaching was. I had no clue. This is what I signed up for. And of course, like very quickly you have to be like, figure that out. Like, all right, well, you didn't know what you signed up for, but you have a room full of 30 kids. My first year in the classroom, I had 30. I ended up with a roster when it was also ended up like 33 kids. My second year, I had 39 students in my classroom. I made it after the first day. I'll say that. I came back the second day.
I mean, that's the step, right? Like, I mean, that is an actual step. I wonder how many people actually go to school the first day and like, you know what? I'm out. I'm good. This is not what I signed up for. And that's perseverance, right? It's taking that next step, showing up the next day and being like, all right, let's try again. So many questions around that. I also just I'm curious as to like, you mentioned like leading as a Latina. What did that look like your first day of TFA? What does it look like now?
Oh, that's a really good question. Because it definitely looks very different now. I think in my first year in TFA, I was still very much cultivating that identity as a whole. Like I have always been extremely proud of being Puerto Rican, my family, where I'm from, all of that. But I didn't have the depth of knowledge around the role that race plays in everyday interactions, in systemic practices and policies in our K through 12 education ecosystem as a whole, that I have since deepened my understanding and continue to deepen my understanding around daily. I think I had anecdotal experiences that I could look at, point to, but I couldn't make sense of them. I couldn't put them in context. And my students who I taught actually moved me further along, I think, on that journey faster than I might have been otherwise, just from having to have really explicit conversations with them about race. The school that I taught at was 99% Black, and we called it a diverse school. That is not a diverse school. It is all one one race. And so, and I remember in my second year of teaching, we had a new student, and she was Puerto Rican. And she like stood out to everybody. It became a topic of conversation for kids. Like it was like, oh my God. And they started calling her the white girl and all this stuff. And we had to have conversations about like, you can't call her that. She's not white. Like, why do you call her that? Let's talk about that. And it forced me to actually think about my own identity. And it was actually through those conversations that I realized just how complex it even was for students to think about racial identity, because they would then say to me, well, Miss Maldonado, you're not white. And I was like, well, what do you think? Like, I'm not white. No, I'm Puerto Rican. But like, what did you guys think I was? And they're like, we thought you were Black. And I was like, but why? And they're like, because you don't act like the other teachers. And so their concept of race was very much tied to behaviors and relationships, in addition to, the actual how they physically identified somebody. And so it forced me to do a lot of learning more quickly of like, how do I understand this so that I can actually have a conversation with my students in a way that supports them and also understanding their own identity as students of color.
I appreciate you sharing that, and it's fascinating, right? Like how we develop that consciousness around our own identities, how we have to engage folks in those conversations, and we don't have all the answers, right? Like even today, like there's still parts, at least for me, I'm going to speak for myself. Like there's parts of me that I'm like, didn't either recognize that, didn't understand that better through practice, right? So my brain is going crazy here with questions and ideas, so I appreciate you sharing that. Quickly, Edwin, good to see you from Baltimore. See, we got
some Northeast love.
Northeast love, right? Also some Boricua love. Delia, hi, Boricua in the house. You said something that I think is really interesting, right? So the students made the comment that you're not like the other teachers. And so to me, that has like a positive implication, right? Like to me, that feels like, hey, you understand us, or like you get us in a different way, or like you're just different and you behave differently than others. I wonder like how at that time that comment made you feel, and also did you notice like that you were different than the other teachers?
I mean, so good. I think you're making me think here. I at the time I interpreted it also as a positive, like, okay, like, sure, that must mean something good. I think what they really meant was I did hold high expectations for them behaviorally and academically. I have other reflections about how I executed on those high expectations back then and whether that was like actually the best way, but it came from a place of actually truly believing like they could do it and there's no excuse for anybody to not meet whatever the expectation was. And we worked really hard on building like a community orientation where it was like, if one of us fail, we all fail. Like there is nobody left behind. And that was behaviorally and academically. So I do think I interpreted it as a positive thing at the time.
That's fair. Lori says, yes, student interprets us teachers and fit us in not like the others. My students also were expressive that I'm Mexican. They thought I was a Black woman. Just that's to me, that's just an interesting way of like navigating race and also like, we censor whiteness as the standard, right? Mm-hmm. in these conversations. And so the fact that like, clearly you're not white, or clearly like these are not what we expect from white. These things are not behaviors or what we expect from white folks or white teachers. That there's a lot to unpack there, and also we don't have all the time in the world to unpack that. I'm curious also. So Philadelphia, what's the Latinx community like in Philadelphia?
Great question. I mean, the Latinx community here is not surprisingly like very diverse. I think that is like the thing I mean, you all know, but I always try to say it for the folks who may be listening, learning, tapped in some way that maybe are not as aware of the diversity even within the Latinx community. It is also still, not surprisingly, as in many other urban cities, still pretty segregated in terms of, where people live by zip code. So I actually live in a very predominantly Italian and Mexican community. And then there is like a separate Puerto Rican community. And then there's, and there are streets people associate with going there or in those communities. And as a result, schools very similarly then are also pretty segregated in that way, where, you have a school that I taught at that was 99% Black, and we had one Puerto Rican student, and then you have other schools that are, 70% English language learners from a specific zip code. But it is a very diverse and thriving community, I would say.
Absolutely. I mean, like that's something a narrative we also have to shift, right? Like these are communities full of assets, and they have, you know, they're thriving in sometimes different ways that folks expect them to thrive, right?
Yeah.
I think that that's important. I would be remiss if saying it's not if it that it's not it's Black History Month, right? And so a question around solidarity. You know, what has been your experience in building relationships amongst Black and Brown communities and efforts to advance this work forward?
I mean, I think especially right now, given everything that has happened this past year as it relates to race in our country, there is a lot of momentum around solidarity in that way, right? Like systemic oppression is real for people of color broadly, generally. And that has big implications for the way we educate Black and Brown kids. I think something I am personally starting to learn a lot more about and am and learning about it because I actually think this is a way I can be a better ally to my Black colleagues, Black educators, is the concept of like what it actually means to be white Latinx, and carry that privilege in this work and what that means about how I show up for not just students, but also like educators broadly in spaces where I am perceived differently because of I'm a light-skinned Puerto Rican. And that carries a separate privilege in and of itself. But I have a lot of, I'm extremely optimistic about all of the potential ahead for schools based on like the conversations that are happening right now, very much driven by Black and Brown communities around the ways in which we have historically failed kids and that the ways in which we continue to do so through our policies, our practices, and forcing the explicit conversation about race in a way that I don't know that we have always in the K through 12 setting. I think some places have done it better than others or have done it maybe have already been engaging in it. But I think it is now becoming more of the norm to be talking about race. And I see it as my role as a light-skinned Latina to show up in those conversations where I'm talking about race much more presently and fully on behalf of my Black colleagues, Black educators.
I think yeah. I think you just blew some people's minds. I remember the time that I even heard the concept of like white Latinx, right, and even just in the racialization of the Latinx identity as well, like a whole different conversation there. Yeah, there are responsibilities that I'm also light skinned. My parents from Nicaragua. They are darker than me for sure. My brother, I mean, like I came out the most light skinned of anybody in the family. But that is also, you know, it's also part of that learning journey of like, you know, it's at I always say this, it's a concept of nepantla, like the in between, right? Like you're neither that, you're not this,
Yeah.
you're somewhere in the middle. And so even learning how to navigate that and navigating with your own privileges and recognizing your own privileges is a lot of work, right? And work needs to be done in order for us to remain and not perpetuate systems of white supremacist culture, right? Like that's something that we have to do. Shout out to the Nikas in the house. Yes, Carla, Nika baby for sure.
I love it.
I just, you know, I want a queso frito and I want like carne asada. That is all I want. Anyways, back to
me hungry.
back to the conversation. So 2020 was definitely an interesting year. We are on the maybe not on the other side, still through the thick of it. But what kind of challenges did you see through COVID-19 in your line of work specifically? And also, what kind of opportunities do you see coming from this time in education?
Yeah, so I mean, the challenges probably are not surprising to people because you all have experienced them and lived them probably very similarly in the, you know, K through 12 setting, with just like the transition to remote learning, virtual learning, whatever phrase you're using in your specific context. But we're not through that challenge yet. And I think it's an opportunity for us to actually rethink the way we do our standard like K through 12 experience broadly, and and not just go back to like brick and mortar. And I think that is actually a challenge right now, is like, how do we actually keep schools from going back to like, once we can finally all be in person, we're all safe, because we have the vaccine or whatever it is, let's just go back to the way we did school before, with 30 kids in a room, put them in rows, you have one teacher at the front and they teach. I just think there is so much opportunity from what we've learned about virtual learning around like other ways to engage kids, the ways we truly should be using technology in a much more innovative way to advance learning, that I really hope that is not what schools do, that they don't just go back to what we did pre-COVID. That is the challenge right now. I think the other challenge alongside that is there's a lot of kids this year that have missed out on instruction for whatever reason. And I worry a lot about when those kids then do come back to school in whatever format it is, that the response will be, okay, you missed, 6 months of learning. We're going to start you 6 months behind from where you should be, as opposed to thinking about how do we start them with grade level content and catch them up to it. And that is not remediation. That is not like, let's give them old content. We'll never catch kids up that way. If you're always giving them some work that is below their current grade level. And so that is another challenge right now that we are trying to work through with districts around what does that actually look like in practice? And how do you, especially when teachers get into the work, I know it's hard, like you're planning, you can make the best plans, and then you get into the lesson and it doesn't go the way you expected and you have to make edits for the next day. How do you get them to not just default back to, we're going to remediate kids the way we always have, but take a fundamentally different approach to instruction, given a lot of kids fell behind from COVID, and a lot of those kids who fell behind were already behind. So we can't just go back to what we were doing before. So those are the two things right now I'm thinking a lot about, is like schools are getting excited about going back to in person. And I'm like, ooh, but just don't go back to exactly what you did before, because that also didn't work before either.
I smile at that because that is a good reminder, right? Like, it has been a long time since we've done things the old way, or it feels like it's been a long time, relatively short period of time considering like the system of education, how long it's been around. But you're right. That's a great reminder and a moment of reflection, hopefully for some folks, to say like, it wasn't great back then either, right? And so like, what do we do with this time and an opportunity to shift our thinking around things, shift how the way we interact with students, shift how we bring them up to speed, or maybe even shift the curriculum, right? Shift the curriculum that they need. What are the new skill sets that need to be demonstrated now versus like what that back in the day? Mm-hmm. Just some other folks commenting here. Martin, as a multicultural Latinx person, it's interesting to see how people react when I tell them that this white-looking guy grew up with a Mexican mother. It's for me. I'm gonna just riff on that because like it's sometimes fun to see what people react to when I say like I'm not Mexican. And so similar there. Delia says schooling will never be the same. And Lori, yes, schooling has changed. The pandemic pushed virtual learning to the front. Okay, Delia, too much. Edgar, that webcam.
I love it.
It looks good when I crave, you know what I'm saying? But it is what it is. Something that clearly we're interested in at the LEC is around it's about increasing representation of Latinx education professionals in K-12, right? Do you think that's important these days? With all the other challenges that we face as a community, do you think that it's important to talk about teacher diversity and the whys and why nots of the work? Or
I can't believe you're asking that question. Yes, I feel like I also think what is especially important about it, in the way that you all think about it, and the way I think we all need to think about it, is it's actually not just representation. Like, it's the why behind representation. Like, you can get a school full of teachers of color, and that's not actually like the end goal in and of itself. It's like the understanding of why that's so important. At TNTP, we actually have an explicit goal about increasing our own Latinx representation. I mean, in the same way that Latinx representation in the educator workforce is a challenge across the country, especially in Kansas City, across the state of Missouri, it's a challenge for us, right? Like, that's essentially our pipeline too. So it is part of our strategic plan to increase our diversity, because we don't believe we can't do work as well as we could if we don't have people who not just look like, but are from and understand the communities in which we are trying to serve, who have been English language learners themselves, even in some cases, and understand that entire experience of being an English language learner in a K through 12 setting. And, you know, I said it earlier, but just like the incredible amount of diversity within the Latinx community too, that is something that is so important that I feel like we also have to strive to ensure that as we're increasing Latinx representation, we're increasing Latinx representation with diversity within it, of all the different types of experiences that go into that. And now I think like for some folks, they like to have the research, but now there is research that also supports all of this, you know, having one teacher of color, teacher that looks like you, rather, how the impact that has on your trajectory as a student. When I think about my teachers of color, I actually never had a teacher of color at all in my K through 12 experience. My teachers of color were, you know, from my community. They were my family members. Those were who taught me like what it meant to lead, how to show up, how to like be a good friend, human, all of that. Those are the teachers of color I think about, but I didn't have one in my K through 12 experience. And again, for me, that didn't make a significant difference, just given I had a lot of other dominoes fall in line for me that helped me. But that's not true for everyone. And I think we need more Latinx representation so that students have that person for them in their corner.
You know, I appreciate that. You actually just set me up for a couple of things. And first, you know, I appreciate your attention to the fact that like our community is incredibly diverse. And that's one of the reasons that we use the term Latinx. I actually really like the X as a symbol, right? And I tell people the same sense I get, like, I really like the X as a symbol. And to me, it's symbolic of all the different nationalities, backgrounds, ancestry that we carry. We transcend race, we transcend culture, right? There's a lot of things that we do. And so that's why I really like that term and why I like using the X. But also, I'm just going to pitch this since you gave me the opening here. The LEC is about to release a teacher diversity report in Kansas City.
Yes.
It's going to come out on Friday. If you want to see it in advance of Friday, you know, go ahead and email me at edgar@latinxedco.org. But one of the data points that we're sharing right now is that only 1% of teachers within the Kansas City metro area identify as Latinx. And so we have districts that are as high as 52% Latinx student population. Like, that's, to me, so we clearly have a lot of work to do in Kansas City. But I also want to be very cautious with this work because the issue is not just recruiting Latinx folks into the spaces, right? The data demonstrate that when Latinx educators and they have a bad experience the first or second year, like, they don't go to a different system. They don't go to a different district. They leave the profession altogether. So if we are not building the cultures that are welcoming and inclusive of Latinx educators, my question then becomes, like, why are we even bothering to recruit? Because we're setting people up for failure. We're setting up educators to fail in those environments. And that's also not like a efficient use of resources, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on that? And if I'm wrong on that, I love my thinking to be pushed on it.
No, I mean, I 100%. I mean, it's interesting because we have this conversation a lot actually within the Latinx affinity group here at TNTP of like, if we have this org-wide goal around recruiting more Latinx staff members, and, you know, not surprisingly, a key way to do that is through Latinx staff, right? Like, tell your friends, tell your family, like, come work over here. And we've had the conversation of, but if I tell them to come work here and they don't have a good experience, like, I feel responsible for that. And I don't want to bring somebody into a place where they're not going to be set up for success, or it's just not the experience we want them to have. And so I think your point around it's not enough to just recruit them. Like, we actually have to make sure we've set the conditions up such that they can be successful and authentically, and not by I think oftentimes when we say successful, we're thinking, many organizations are, from a like white supremacist culture norms definition of what success looks like. And we have to deconstruct that and what that actually means in terms of success, because not only do you not set them up for success, you don't set them up to be able to contribute in the way that they fully and wholly could in service of the work. Like, that's the thing that I always come back to, is like, that's why they're here, is because like they have this awesome and unique perspective just inherent by who they are that we need to learn from, and that will help us do better work. And we have to make sure that they're actually able to, in a safe space, share that. So I think you're 100% right on that.
And I'm just going to give a shout out to TNTP here, because I've been working with some of your friends in the HR kind of world. And I think the goal that you have around recruiting more Latinx folks is aggressive. And so I appreciate the aggressive goal, right? I think that is something that it's a sizable goal. And I also do think that there's commitment there to make sure that the environments are being created, that it's going to not just, we're not just going to hit the numbers and then like forget about it. Like, we actually have to retain the community in these spaces as well, and give them an opportunity to thrive. But I'll take your perspective offline as well too, because I think it's also important. I mean, these are difficult conversations to have, and it's a difficult thing to navigate regardless. But no, I've been I love the aggressive goal. I think that's one of the things that I'm excited about from an organizational perspective for you all. What are your goals? I mean, like, what are your hopes for, this is a big question. Like, what are your goals for our community long-term, or in terms of either your contribution, or what are some of your dreams?
I don't know, for the world.
For yourself?
Yeah. I think when I think about I think there's a few ways like I could enter this. I think when I think about K through 12 specifically, I do think we're at a really big moment of inflection. And I think what we choose to do from this moment will have long-lasting ripple effects for the next 100 years, because we know that's how, change is slow generally, especially when we're talking about systems. But what I keep thinking back to is like, but when COVID happened, all these school systems that had been trying to, get more technology integrated into their day-to-day did it like that, because you had to. Like, there was no choice. And I was like, if we could all just not move forward with that urgency all the time around, like, it doesn't actually have to be this long, drawn out, in order for us to integrate technology, it's going to be a 5-year plan. Like, no, you can actually move more quickly. Now, I'm not saying COVID or like a global pandemic is the ideal context for which that to happen, but I'm saying it's a proof point that change can happen quickly. And I hope that we learn from that, and we don't take as long as we typically do to make change looking ahead. And I think especially as it relates to these conversations about race and the implications for what it means around how we've been educating kids and how we've actually been failing them in terms of access to opportunity. I want that like to spark change much more quickly. I think we're like right on the impetus of it, but I also think we could default back to when schools open up, like, okay, back to business as usual, and like bucket everything that was the era of COVID into the box that it was, and kind of put it on the shelf for a minute. So I hope that. I also hope that we use this as a chance to really like listen to kids more. We've been doing some work in Kansas City called the Kansas City Opportunity Accelerator, where it's focused explicitly on equity and understanding from a school level to what extent do students have access to good instruction, grade level content, teachers with high expectations, all of those important things. And we collect all this data to make it. And we also do student focus groups. And the data is really helpful, really helpful. But also, if you like look back at the student focus groups, they kind of told you everything that was going to be in that data report. And so I also really hope that we learn to listen to kids more about what their experience is and what it means about how we can make it better, and not always need to wait for like here's our 3-year research study that says this is what we need to do, when I think kids could probably point us there quicker in some cases.
Why don't you think we listen to kids more?
I think listening to kids more requires us to admit we don't have the answers and that we don't know. And I think that is scary for a lot of people. and for systems too, right? But yeah, so that's my perspective on why I don't think we listen to them as much as we should, because it requires us to admit potential fault, wrong, or that we didn't actually have that solution.
I appreciate that response. I'm going to pivot here. Here we go. Carla says, yes, COVID-19 shifted things. Moving forward, we have opportunities to reform our educational system and other systems. Absolutely. Education wasn't the only system impacted by COVID-19. And so and Carla does great work on the healthcare side of things as well.
Nice.
So she's doing some things in that space that are pretty innovative as well. I've never asked a Puerto Rican this, so I'm going to ask a Puerto Rican this. In fact, today I'll just call it Ask a Puerto Rican. What's your favorite thing about being Puerto Rican?
Oh my God. All right. I mean, the food, I feel like I don't want to offend anybody, but I do like our Puerto Rican dishes carry a je ne sais quoi about them.
The fact that you use French to say that about Puerto Rican
don't
food,
I think that, but I also just like, I just love, and I don't know that this is specific to being Puerto Rican. I think it's actually specific to many, many Latinx cultures. It's just like the community that you get inherently by like being Puerto Rican or being Latinx. Like, like I said, I live in a neighborhood that is predominantly Italian and Mexican. And on both sides of me, I have 2 Mexican families, and, we look out for each other. Like, I know my house is fine whenever I leave because they're looking out for my house. And I just feel like, that like community, you look out for your people, and always knowing that, I don't have to know you personally to have your back is something that just always warms my heart.
I love that. I will say, and this is just I'm putting my Nicaragüense hat on. What's that plantain? Like the plantain? Is it mofongo?
Yeah.
So only had it like recently for like the first time, like 2 years ago.
Red onion.
I didn't get it.
Oh.
I like tostones. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm a big fan of tostones, and like I was like, really? Like, that's what it is? I had just
you didn't have it right.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know what? I'll take you up on the offer. Melissa says the food.
All right, Melissa.
Elia says the flag.
The flag.
Arroz con gandules, mondongo, pastelón, mofongo. Pastelón is pretty good, I will say. And lechon, good stuff. Also, coquito. I'm a big fan of the coquito.
Come on. Right?
You just can't. Anyways.
You're doing my job you're proving my point for me.
You're right. So Puerto Ricans are cool in general. So I'll just say that. As we wrap up our time, I think the question I always love to ask folks in this space is like, how can we support you as a community? What can we do for you?
I would just say, like, honestly, just like reach out. Like, one of the things that I love most about my job is being able to actually just like, it's part of my job to just talk to people about what it is they're working on, like what the problems are, and try to find points of collaboration. And I feel like most often that's where like I'm actually finding I get my energy and my fuel. It's like, not this specific work task over here that I'm executing on. It's the conversations with people. And I think especially right now during COVID, where, I live alone. And like, I have a huge Puerto Rican family, which like, being home for a couple weeks during the holiday made it actually quite nice to come back home alone for a longer period of time. But all that connection, like with community is where I get my fuel. So I would just say, reach out, like, let me know how we TNTP can help. Because I'm like, there's so much opportunity for collaboration. I don't know that we always find the points of it.
That's true. And I think that, you're absolutely right. And sometimes it's not even a matter of like finding the points. It's like making sure you're finding the time is actually not even the right way to say that. It's like you're prioritizing it, right? And you're being thoughtful, and also you're inviting people into the work. I mean, I think that's something that like you have to learn along the way. Like people want to be invited into spaces, and people want to be invited into the conversations as well. And so I accept your challenge. I take it. I receive it, and I will follow up on that as well on my end. Delia also says salsa, by the way. I don't know.
Hello. Yeah.
Is that a thing? Like I don't know.
Yes. What do you mean? Oh my
Are we talking
gosh.
about the food, or are we talking about like the music?
No, we're talking about the dance. Come on.
Okay, whatever.
I will also say this on the support end. If you know of any strong rising Latinx educators, send them to KC Plus. We need more Latinx leaders. We need more Latinx leaders.
I'm actually going to be reaching out to Dr. Pacina and invite him on the show
Yes.
to talk about KC Plus and his work as well. So absolutely. Well, before I wrap up here and I wrap up with Angela, first and foremost, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to put on my Gen Z hat and just say, hey, if you are on this page for the first time, make sure to go ahead and like that Facebook page. If you're joining us from YouTube, go ahead and make sure to subscribe. I don't know, ring the bell. I don't know what that means, but it means something to somebody else. We always welcome your support and your engagement, and it helps us actually get our voices and the message out. And we absolutely believe in increasing the representation of Latinx education professionals, and this is one of the ways that we do it. We give space to our leaders in our community doing this work, and we encourage them and hopefully show them some love along the way. Again, thank you so much, Angela, for joining us today. I hope it gets warmer in Philly. I know that y'all had a lot of snow. And I also look forward to breaking bread with you at some point in time and eating food and talking about.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for creating this space for Latinx educators in Kansas City. And we will definitely be breaking bread soon.
Awesome.
Right way.
I won't take you up on that offer because I was unimpressed, and I thought I would be more impressed, but maybe it's just me. Anyways, thank you everyone for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.